Well, welcome everybody. It's just turned 4 o'clock, and so I will get going because I do want to kind of make sure that we finish kind of roughly on time. So we're going to spend 30 minutes interviewing and talking to Kandace Chimbiri, who's with us today, which I'm absolutely thrilled about, and Kate Brindle, who's our primary English lead and writes all our cross-curricular sets as well. If you are not familiar, if you're new to learning by questions, I'll just give you a super quick rundown of what that is before we get on to the star of the show, Kandace. So learning by questions is a tool. It's a classroom tool. It's built to use in the lesson. And it's made up of 2 parts. One part is these fantastic set of resources. So we cover all the curriculum objectives in your core subjects at primary and at secondary, which means that if you're in year 6, you can reach up into some year 7 material or down into year 5 material if you need it. The content is made up of question sets. The question sets are scaffolded. So you send them out with the iPad and the children start answering the questions at their own pace in their own time. The platform can tell if children are answering really well, and it moves them up to the next level of challenge for them. And in real time, the teachers can see exactly how all the pupils are getting on. So if they see that there's a pupil that's struggling or the class is struggling with something, they can stop and they can intervene in the moment when it really matters in the lesson. So they're the 2 elements of it. You've got this amazing resource bank and you've got this amazing delivery platform, which means that you are making really great quality interventions when you can maximize that impact the most in the lesson. And of course, there's no marking afterwards. So on average, people say it saves them an hour per lesson in marking and planning. We'll tell you, I don't want to waffle on about that because you've really come to see Kandace, but partly having Kandace with us is about the fact that we know that teachers want to use all sorts of tools in the classroom, all sorts of different inspiring materials and so on. And so we were delighted to have Kandace come and talk to us today. So yeah, what I want to do now is just turn over to Kandace to introduce her. Now, Kandace is an author. She's incredibly inspiring because she writes Black history books for Key Stage 2. She's passionate about writing about Black history as she is about literacy, Key Stage 2 children. She self-published her books to begin with, and now she's working with Scholastic on her books. They're publishing her books for her. But Kandace, why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit about yourself and your story?
Thank you, Heather. What can I say? I will start off by saying what I'm not. I'm not a teacher, I'm not an academic, and I'm not a historian. I consider myself a Black history enthusiast. Black history is something I'm very passionate about. My parents came to the UK from Barbados in the 1960s. They met here and they married, had 2 daughters, my sister and me, and went back to Barbados. So I had all my primary education in London and my secondary education in Barbados, which is where I fell in love with Black history. And my family still live in Barbados, but I came back. And when I came here and I went into bookshops and I looked around, I was quite surprised at what I would call the limitations of Black history that was available to children. I was quite surprised not to see a broader range. I know that there have been Black history in the UK before the Windrush. There have been Black people here in Roman times, in Tudor times, Victorian times. And I was just a bit surprised by what I felt was missing. And from that, I just decided to start writing and self-publishing, as you said, Heather, books for children, and particularly around Key Stage 2. I also found there was a lot of information available right here in the UK, a lot of it in museums, not always acquired in the best way, but the history is here, so it's available. And that's really how I got started, originally mainly concentrating on ancient history. And then a bit later on, I decided to do a bit more modern Black British history, starting with the story of the Windrush. And that's really it in a nutshell.
Yeah, this The Story of the Windrush, and I happen to have a lovely copy of it here. And I would definitely recommend it. It's an absolutely beautiful book. And also the illustrations are also very beautiful. I'll show you a blank page. Look how marvelous the illustrations are, everybody. Let me find a really good one. It's absolutely beautiful. Tell me, what made you decide to tell the story of the Windrush? And I'll show some pictures while we do this.
So I had written, my previous books had been concentrating more on ancient African history. And I hadn't written anything for a few years. And I wanted to do something more because I knew there was so much more to do. There were so many gaps. And it was 2017, and I was just thinking about it. And I realized that 2018 would be the 70th anniversary of the arrival of the Empire Windrush. And it's such an important part of British history, Black history, British history, world history. It's considered a point in time when Britain had to talk about being multicultural, and it had to start talking about immigration in a way it hadn't had to before. And yet I didn't see many books for children on this topic. I did see a few books for adults, but not for children. And I thought about it and I thought this is something that should have been really, something children should have been exposed to much more over the last 70 years. And so I decided to do the book as a little small book, as you saw, a little hardback sort of book that I would have read when I was little, but didn't. And that's really how I got the idea for doing it.
I remember when we just had a little chat a couple of weeks ago about things, and you were saying that when you got your publisher, you said, look, this is a deal breaker for me. Of all my books, this is the one that you absolutely need to go to town on. Why was that? Because all the stories you're telling are really important, aren't they?
They are all important, but some of them may be a little bit more niche. I still think children should be exposed to a wide range of history. And there is a lot of Black history. It doesn't just start with enslavement or civil rights. There's quite a range. And I feel passionate about ancient history as well, but not everyone is as interested in that. But this is actually a part of modern British history. It should be mandatory, really. If there's going to be something that would be mandatory, I would make it this. So that's why, for me, it was really important that that particular book was, taken on by the publisher and made more available.
Yeah, and it is available, Melanie. I know you put in the chat there about being able to buy. Yes, I mean, I bought my copy of online, so easily through Amazon. You can get copies. I'm sure there are other more local booksellers as well that you will be able to get copies from, but it's very readily available. And I'll send some links around afterwards as well, so that everybody can get. And Kandace's new books comes out in October. You could just tell us a little bit about that, Kandace, and then people know that that's coming up as well.
Yeah, this is a slightly different book. It's called The Story of Afro Hair, 5,000 Years of History, Fashion and Style. So it's a much bigger book. It's a more challenging text. Although it's for Key Stage 2, I would say The Story of the Windrush is a good book to sort of start with and then graduate to the story of Afro Hair, because it's obviously bigger, it's a longer read, although you can dip in and out of it, but it also expands on some of the more challenging topics, which are perhaps touched on a bit more lightly in The Story of the Windrush.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point you made there, Kandace, about where to start. And I think that's going to be on people's minds as they think about teaching Black history. How do we begin this? And in The Story of the Windrush, you tell a story of a man called Sam King in there. You tell other stories too, but we kind of follow Sam's journey along, don't we? And from leaving his home and arriving in England and what happens to him there. How does focusing on one person's story really help you to convey really a much bigger movement and some much bigger issues to children?
Yes, I think because not even just children, even as adults, we like stories, right? We are all geared to enjoying stories. But also sometimes focusing on a person or people's experience, it makes it more relatable. You can also understand cause and effect more. You can see by doing this or saying this, this is the effect it has on someone. And I saw Sam King speak a couple of times before he passed away. And I think I myself, listening to him speak, felt, gosh, this, you just feel you can relate to it as a person rather than a big event or abstract concepts. And that's why I actually chose his story rather than even my parents' story, because it just seemed his life was particularly exciting. He actually came on the Windrush. He became a mayor. So he also wrote about his experiences a lot more. So there was a lot of that available to tap into. And you could see that this would be something that children would be able to understand better. So I thought it was a good idea to do it through his life, even though it's not his autobiography. You don't find out everything about him.
Yes. It could cover other people too, doesn't it?
Yes.
You've just got this nice thread running through it.
Yes.
I mean, I've read this with my daughter, Honey, who is 10 years old at home. And one of the things that we really loved was about the Calypso music. And you can find on YouTube, you can find the clip of Lord Kitchener singing "London is the Place for Me." And so we were able to just you could pull out of this book in a kind of multimedia way as well. Do you know what I mean? And let's stop and watch that video then. And that's one of the things that we really liked about it too.
And that was deliberate, Heather, because I didn't want to, it's only a small book. I didn't want to write a book that would be, oh, this is the definitive book. You've read this book and now you know everything. I wanted it to be like that so that you could be introduced to this story, but go away and do more research, find out more, and as you said, I've mentioned other people in there, the Calypsonians and Mona Baptiste, so that you can do more research and, delve in and keep discovering all these stories, because it's not really one story. It's called The Story of the Windrush, but it's really the stories of all these people, and that's what it's about. It's about people. History shouldn't be about dates. Well, it has to be to a degree, but it's not really the dates. It's really people. That's really what it should be about. And sometimes I think that gets forgotten a little bit.
And presumably that's the most, I don't know, Kate, how you feel about the book. That's the most impactful part of learning, is where we're talking about people, or we're talking about stories that affect real people and around us, as opposed to concepts or labels.
They want to identify with other humans. It's a very human characteristic, isn't it? Children want to find people that they can identify with and share experiences with. And sometimes introducing them to like a big concept, I don't know, I must have talked to some year threes about jealousy. Has anybody ever been jealous? And they all sat there with big eyes going, oh, no, we haven't been jealous. And then I read them a story about a little girl who'd had a baby brother, and she was really, really jealous of all the attention it was getting. And almost all of them at that point went, oh, yeah, I felt exactly like that at some point, and told me story. Before I introduced the story of another child, they weren't sure if they were allowed to express themselves, or they didn't have the words to express themselves. So telling a story gives them someone to identify with, and it also gives them the language to express their story and give help them just start saying those words. And definitely all humans will gravitate, I think, towards the story of another human.
Yeah, I think just to build upon that point somewhat, one of the things I was quite surprised about in the book was that you don't ever use the word racism or the term racism in the book at all. And I just wondered whether that was deliberate and how important I think we're starting to answer that question about labeling and language, especially when we're talking about Key Stage 2 children. I remember, sorry to keep harping on about my own daughter, I'm just a mum bore over here, but she was doing Rosa Parks and Nelson Mandela in school. And so she was bringing home, and this was years with like Key Stage, year 3, talking about apartheid and stuff. This was a huge concept to try and explain to her when she was, 3 years ago, do you know what I mean, from where she is now. And so it really struck me then, well, I don't have to unpick a concept, an idea or an ideology in this. I'm just telling the story. I just wondered what you thought about language and labels, because you clearly don't use them here. You use the stories.
Yes, when I wrote that book, which was obviously in 2017 for 2018, and as I said, I wanted it to be, and I realized there wasn't other books like that or on this topic, at least that I'd seen for children. So I wanted it to be an introduction. I wanted it to be an honest book. I still wanted to not shy away from talking about some of the bad experiences. But at the same time, I know it is a book for children, and I try to get a balance. I wanted to have a little bit of a balance. I know that children will be able to relate to the story of people being turned away or refuse things, and that will already in itself be quite shocking. But I felt it was better just to tell it as it happened like that, rather than trying to delve too much into concepts or use words. And that seems to have been, the best approach. Some children will actually understand that and they'll read that and they'll say, that's racism. Sir, miss, that's racism. They'll get it. Others may not. But I just felt that was the right way to do it. With the latest book, it does use the word racism. And like I said, it's a more challenging text. And that's obviously partly because it's 2020. After 2020, a lot of things have happened, and children will also be aware of that. And maybe if they've, had the story of the Windrush first, then they'll be a bit more prepared for the next book. But yes, it was deliberate not to say that. And I don't think Sam King, even himself, when I heard him speak, he didn't, he spoke about his life, and that was the way I wanted to present it, pretty much through that structure. So I felt it was more important to stick to the story of the experiences of the people rather than bringing concepts in, and let the children and teachers come to that themselves or work on that themselves.
Yeah, I think that's where we're landing, is that this is just a really brilliant entry point. It's not the destination. You could then take your children off further into these concepts. Once you understand the story, it's a bit like Kate was just talking about with jealousy. If you can't convey the story or the empathy of something, then you can't put a label on it. You can't work backwards from the label in a way. I mean, you work towards a concept or an understanding of a concept there. And I think that opened up, a kind of discussion about introducing really quite ugly history, ugly ideas to some children for whom this is a non-issue. They do not see, difference in skin color as any kind of separation between themselves. And there are some children for whom that will be very much their day-to-day lives. I mean, they'll be very, very aware of that. What do you think about that hesitation about exploring some of this stuff? I think it maybe comes from a fear of getting it wrong. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it is, as an author, someone who's writing these books and has decided to do this, it is something that you'd never lose that fear. I mean, you do think, am I getting the tone right? Am I getting the language right? I mean, obviously, before I go to print, I let people read the book, including teachers as well. But it is something that it is a minefield, and it's really, really difficult. But you can't completely avoid it, because if you don't tell the children about it, they won't know, and they'll be going out into the world, maybe getting into situations that they might not have gotten into, saying things they might not have said, as soon as they don't know. I've met people in my life who have had jobs where they've had to travel overseas, people from the UK, and they've gone to other countries and they've been really embarrassed because they didn't know about the history of some of the things around empire, because they weren't ever taught it, and they've said things, and then people have had to educate them, and they've been okay in the end, but it's not really the way we want children to be in the future. But the world is becoming much more global. We can't teach everything, we can't tell them everything, but they have to still be aware of certain things, and this is one of the things that they need to know a bit more.
And it definitely doesn't live in the past, does it? In the last year or two, we've had Black Lives Matter. This is the world that our children live in. They see this stuff on the news, they're hearing about these things, or they're living it as part of their lives. Do you know what I mean? And I think that makes learning so much, when we lean into what's actually happening in children's lives, the learning becomes so much more powerful, because it's not just theoretical, it's what they're actually living. We're not just talking about things in the past here, are we?
Unfortunately, no. When I do the virtual school visits, one of the things that I'm always asked by children, I don't know why, but they always ask this question: do I think things are better or not? They always ask that.
It's a great question.
They always ask that. There's always one child in the class who asks that. So it's something that they are thinking about. And like I said, when I wrote that book, that was in 2018. And then 2 years later, we still had to be, talking about this and dealing with these issues. So we can't avoid them, even though we might want to. We've tried avoiding it. We've tried pretending to be blind to certain things. It hasn't worked. So we haven't got a choice. We'll do the children a disservice if we try to ignore these things. As difficult as it is, and it is difficult, as you said, but we have to still try.
So fascinated. How do you respond? What's your response to that answer to that question? It's an excellent question.
It is an excellent question. The questions are sometimes so challenging. Sometimes I think,
so I'm just going to push you on that, Kandace.
Yeah. No, I answer honestly. I do tell them that things are better, but they're definitely not as good as they should be, and perhaps not as good as some people think. So I do tell them that honestly. And they do also often ask me whether I have experienced racism in my life. Quite a few children ask that as well. And of course,
because it keeps bringing back to the personal stories. That's how they are really, communicating about this. Tell us your story, isn't it? Like what's happening with you. We also, this is a slightly different issue, but on Learning by Questions, Kate has done some beautiful short reads and question sets around the pandemic and children's fears when we went into lockdown about mixing with family members. Some of the normal activities that they would that kind of ground their lives were cancelled, things they were looking forward to. And there was some genuine fear with children about returning to the classroom or going back out into the world. And Kate, you had to tackle that in an honest but a sensitive way, didn't you?
Yeah, and also in a way that, sometimes we don't have all the answers and we can't categorically say this is how it's going to be and this is how it's going to end up. And we shouldn't give false reassurance or lie, like Candace says, or emphasising honesty is important. It's okay to say to children, I don't know what's going to happen here, but this is what we can do together in the meantime. And it just reassuring children that they're not alone with fears goes a long way. And it goes much further than giving them some sort of lie or false promise or it'll all be over by Christmas kind of nonsense. But just being honest and saying, but we can do this. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is what we can do for now, and we'll get through and we'll get along. And those stories came from personal experiences with my family members and little family members who couldn't sleep at night and were worried. And that kind of, gave me the motivation to think, this is global. All children across the whole world are going to be scared right now. And it's important to just say, yeah, we're all scared, and it's okay to be scared, and you don't have to hide it. And let's do some things that make us feel better, and we'll do them together, and we'll get through.
And just like Kandace's story, it was that I think some of the crucial element was finding that entry point. What is the entry point? What's the story we're going to tell? What's the entry point we're going to have here? And pitching that correctly. And I remember you saying you was going to write this story, and you went for a big long walk to how you were going to start it, and you passed this tree, and there were all the little pebbles under the tree painted with the rainbows for the NHS on it, and you're like, that's their experience, that's how they're expressing it, we're going to start there. And I think that's what tallies both of these situations, is that these are things that really are in these children's lives, in their environment, a part of their fears, and finding that correct entry point through story is a brilliant place to start. I have to be really, really honest. I'm talking about honesty, and that's I mean, when I talk to Kandace, that's a continual theme. Is the word honesty comes up a lot. I was nervous about hosting this. I kind of thought, I'm going to stumble into saying the wrong thing, or accidentally get something wrong. And I assume that maybe there are teachers that feel the same way out there about next month, or rather brilliantly, if they're covering throughout the year, you know, rather than go, we're just going to put this one special month aside for it. But if they're covering, or who might kind of go, do you know, I'm going to get this terribly wrong, so I'm just not going to do it at all, which is comes from fear of getting through. But it's so important. That's why I'm continuing to do it, is to go, that's even more reason to kind of get into this. And as you say, Kate, let's do it together. I'm not perfect. We're going to explore this together.
Yeah.
What do you have some advice? I mean, we've discussed this in the past, and there've been some, you know, some really awful activities suggested for teachers. I mean, I've heard on the grapevine about people reenacting slave auctions, just appalling suggestions about how to cover this, cover some of Black history at school. What would, if you had 3 things that you could maybe suggest, you know, where teachers start, what the role is of teachers in passing on this Black history?
So I would say don't start with enslavement. There are some children who have only learned slavery through their whole time in school and nothing else about Black history. That's the wrong place to start. It's an important part. It has to be taught. But I wouldn't start with that. I would start with something else. I feel the story of the Windrush is a good place to start, although it's important to highlight that there were Black people in Britain before the Windrush, maybe not as many, but there were there. But that could be a good place to start. I also feel it's important to try not to be too US centric. One of the reasons why I started writing these books was because when I went and I looked at what was available, I always saw the same stories, which was, you know, Nelson Mandela, well, he's South African, Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, yeah, very much, which are really important as well, but they're not a substitute for Black British history and other history. Black history is extremely broad. It's very, very, you know, it's thousands of years. Mankind, we are told, started in Africa. There's a lot of history, but obviously there's not as many resources covering that. So you could start, you know, with something like the Windrush, but definitely don't start with enslavement, and try to bring some balance as well. Try to bring some British history as well.
Yeah, one of your other books is about ancient Egypt, but it's not just ancient Egypt, a la Cleopatra or Hatshepsut. I mean, we're going way before that, aren't we? I mean, this is Black history. This is where it started, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I wanted to do something a bit before the Greeks and the Romans came to Egypt as well. So
I think as well, maybe we talked about in the past about the idea of token activities of doing history. You know, what are the kind of activities that you think that we should avoid doing?
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I know why it happens, not just in school, but even in companies when they have Black History Month and they decide to do, I don't know, cook rice and peas or jollof rice or something like that. And I understand, because we don't have as much information as we should have for obvious reasons. So it can be challenging to actually do history in the same way. But I would say, you know, flip it on its head. If you were doing an English history thing, would you just cook fish and chips and say, right, we've done English history? You wouldn't. Yeah. That wouldn't be acceptable unless you were talking about the history of fish and chips and then eating some fish and chips. So sometimes if you
and I'm all for that. There's no problem with that.
And that would be okay. But sometimes if you flip it a bit and think, you know, if it was the other way around, would I do this? That can sometimes help to show maybe where we do need to try and look at doing it a little bit different. And, you know, I'm all for, you know, children dressing up and things like that as well. But again, you have to be really careful with that, because if you're trying to do that as history, it's not history. And it's certainly not history to act out a slave auction. That's just not appropriate. You know, you've got to think about sensitivity as well. And it's just not the right way to approach it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of open up the interview now. If anybody's got a question for Kandace, I mean, Kandace and Emily here, Emily from Virtual School Visits. Kandace comes and does, is what it says on the tin, virtual school visits. Come into your classroom, meet your children, you talk about the story of the Windrush or any of the other books that Kandace has, and Kandace obviously will talk to the children as well. Kandace, are you finding that you're getting busier year on year around Black History Month? I mean, is that some kind of evidence this is becoming more and more important?
It is, but it isn't as busy as last year. And I think across the board, I think last year there was a real focus. I feel that now maybe people are starting to drop a little bit, and that's really important not to lose that focus. We know last year was challenging. There were events that happened and protests and things that made people realize we need to do more, but it's important to keep it sustained, not just think, right, we did that in 2020. Now we don't need to do that history. We're going to go back to where we were again. So, but it's definitely busier than it was.
So applauding all the teachers who've come today, because clearly this is still very firmly on everybody's agenda here. Well done, everybody. So does anybody have a question for Kandace? We could start with talk about the book, or about teaching Black history generally, covering Black History Month. Claire, you look like you're really thinking about it, and I'm going to give you total kudos. I can see the brain like thinking, I've got a question. Are you teaching it next month, Claire? Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking hard. Yeah, last year we did Henry's Freedom Box, and as the book, and we did work, and then we used.
Oh no, we've lost Claire.
In October, and then we did a book, and it was about the Windrush. I can't remember the author just for now. She was a BBC children's presenter, but her name escapes me for now. But it just
Benjamin.
Thank you very much. But because we're 5, 6, it just wasn't quite the level. So we've planned our books, and we haven't, and I hadn't found one in time. So I'm just wondering, how long would it take, do you think, a class to read your book? I'm wondering if we can fit it in, do you know, and I'm wondering if we could have a day. I'm taking the history lead this year in school. I'm wondering whether we can have, so sorry, you've asked me, so tell me when to stop.
No, you go, Claire, you're on fire.
Well, I'm just wondering whether we could have a day where we make this a focus for the whole school, and then obviously I know it should be a focus throughout the year, and then more so throughout October, but just to get everybody, you know, like just to get everybody thinking about it. And I'm wondering whether Key Stage 1, if it's too, do you know what I mean? Whether they'd be able to dip into it. If it's a definite Key Stage 2 book, would it be more 3, 4? Would it be more 5, 6? Could we have a virtual school visit and have everyone read the book and then we come in? Do you know? I'm just having lots of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, Kandace, do you want to jump in there?
I'll let Kate say, because Kate is, you know, we'll look at it from your point of view as an educator. As the author, I would say Key Stage 1 to me is a little bit too young.
Yeah.
Some teachers have been using just the cover of the book to teach empathy, but I would say Key Stage 1 is a bit young. But Key Stage 2, both upper and lower, I feel, and Kate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've seen,
I would suggest it's exactly that. It's a Key Stage 2 book.
Yeah, it's a very easy read. 48 pages. It's not got too many difficult words. Yeah.
Okay.
And you found that as well, have you, Kate?
Yeah, it's clearly Key Stage 2. But I think for year threes, maybe with a little support, and kind of perfectly placed for fours, fives, sixes, really, as independent reads. But there's so much more content in it than is in it, if you see what I mean. We were talking about that earlier, weren't we? So, you know, you could take the book on its own and do some lovely lessons around it, but then pulling out lots of different aspects and strands to differentiate with, and getting children to do their own research, it's a great starting point for that.
Yeah, right, thank you very much. And thank you very much. I'm having a wonderful time.
Yay!
I'm going to put myself on mute because, I mean, obviously,
I picked on you, Claire, and you've done very well. I'm going to pick on Louise now, because Louise, you said you were doing it all year round, which is round of applause for Louise.
Well, we're trying. We're just in early days with our topics. We just started revamping our history topics. I've just taken on the lead, so we're trying very hard to find opportunities to integrate Black history and diversity in its broadest sense through all of our topics. But I have to say, we're finding it quite tough at the moment to try and find the right focus for the different year groups. So this is why I came along today, really, just to listen to what you've got to say, and to hear about this book and how we could use it. So my sort of brain, a bit like Claire, is whirring here, thinking how can we how can we fit this in, and where's it going to fit throughout our school, but also any advice from anybody really about opportunities through all year groups to integrate Black history, and any ideas that people have used would be really useful.
We will be following up after this chat by sending you a kind of really nice one-page PDF that also links towards some of our resources. And Kate and I were like, after we'd had our initial chat with Kandace, because we fall into one of the traps that Kandace mentions, which is don't just focus on USA history, make sure you've got, children in this country, Black children in this country, will want to know their own history of this country, not just the history in America. And Kate and I are so on board with that, you would not believe. And so what we're going to say is this is a starting point. So on Learning by Questions, we do have some really nice interactive resources based on other Black historical figures as well. Kate, do you want to just give us a quick intro of the couple of people that are on there?
We do have
some of the material we've got.
We can start with Mary Seacole, but then we did do a little sort of NASA scientists focus in the biographies. So we do have some fantastic resources for the astronaut Mae Jemison. We've got a biography of Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, and Katherine Johnson, the NASA scientists and mathematicians. So yeah, we do have some resources, not going terribly far back in history, but yeah, we can start with one Black British icon.
We will do better.
We will do better. I've been doing some research.
We are doing better. But Kate, what kind of year groups are we talking about there as well?
Yeah, so the Mae Jemison biography is 3-4, and so is the Mary Seacole biography. And then the three NASA scientists, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, are all year 5-6 biographies there. And they all come in the form of short reads. So we split out reading skills into the pre-read, which is vocabulary, retrieval set, and a features set, so looking at the features of biographies there. So they're in the short reads, non-fiction comprehensions of our content.
Brilliant. And we'll send the links to all of those. They're free to use as well, for at least 30 days, but the content is free to use the rest of the time as well. The 30 days is about this amazing delivery platform that allows you to see how the children are answering in real time. There's also the possibility of sending an ad hoc question, which I think is quite nice for this. If you wanted to send a question out to your class and then be able to reply to it kind of anonymously. What do you think about this issue? When you think about this person, what words spring to mind? And they come up on the board, and then you can use them like a discussion point, which I think would be quite nice. And we've got a few LBQ users in the audience, and I just wondered whether any of our LBQ gang have used any of these cross-curricular reads before, and whether, yeah, Merlin, you're nodding. You've used it. Just were they good? Can you tell us what you think?
Yes, I did. I used a number of the short reads, like I did Mae Jemison and a couple others, because when you ask children to read something more than once, usually they get bored, but LBQ has done it so beautifully. And that's one of the selling points with it too. The child can read the same passage 3 different times, and it's 3 different activities. They don't even realize they're actually reading the same text. Because we were doing biographies, and those ones, the LBQ had it, so we did it through the short reads, and the children really enjoyed. It's a lovely story, and it has the questions, and it has the pre-read, everything. And at the same time, it's non-fiction, so the features come up, and using it, we find out that the children retain better than anything else when they use that.
Kate's
I'm
grinning.
delighted.
Kate,
I'm
could you
delighted.
smile wide
Thank you so
enough?
much, Millie.
Yeah. There's a thing. I mean, we've talked about texts in the past, other texts, and some are great. They're just really enjoyable, not that great to teach with, though, from a literacy point of view. So that's another aspect, isn't it, to consider here when you're picking your reading material. Is, you know, can I use this to optimum effect from a literacy point of view as well?
Yeah, but I was thinking about Kandace's story of the Windrush and the question about, you know, suitability for Key Stage 1. It doesn't have, you don't have to pull out the history for the Key Stage 1 necessarily, but you could pull out the music for the Key Stage 1, get some musicians in, have a lovely afternoon, you know, playing loads of musical instruments, having a really nice, you know, you can get so much from it, and it doesn't necessarily have to go in a box of being literacy or being history.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, spread it out across all aspects of the curriculum, if you like.
That's lovely. Is anybody, we've got the amazing Kandace here for another 2 minutes. Does anybody have any questions at all? John just disappeared then. I always take the thing first. I'm joking, John. Don't worry about it.
It was when you said amazing.
I had camera trouble, so I've had to set it up so it's really low. So I put myself on then because I was going to say, but you spoke really well about the benefits of LBQ. So that I'm going to flip myself off because I can't look and I don't know where to look. And it was just the worst time. It wasn't a question. I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. My love, it's absolutely fine. So yes, use my love. I was talking about this earlier about me using these kind of northern colloquialisms to refer to one another, and shouldn't do it when I get in big trouble. Anybody else for Kandace? Everybody just loved it. I hope this was really helpful to everybody. I cannot tell you just how excited I was about doing this for Kandace and what a joy it's been. We obviously had a kind of like sneaky get together before this so we could get to know one another and what we're covering. It wasn't that sneaky, but it's just been really lovely, Kandace, to get to know you and for you to take part in stuff with LBQ. We just absolutely love it, and hopefully it's the beginning of lots more activities to come. That's really brilliant. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Like I said, we will email out some lovely lesson plans that have got links to this interview if you want to share with colleagues. There's links to our content as well. And also I'll send you a link so you know how to get hold of your copies for the story of the Windrush. We will be picking one lucky school from the attendee list. And we paid for Kandace to come and do a virtual visit with that school and buy the books for your class. And also, if you're not aware of this, we do the same thing for our ambassadors. So our LBQ ambassadors, we have, if you're part of our ambassador team, we have also paid for one of our ambassadors to have a visit next month during Black History Month. Kandace will come to the class virtually, and we will get the books for everybody in the class as well for that, so that we've got you covered. Basically, we've got you covered. Look at Melly. She's Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. I hope your terms are off to a brilliant start. And if you've got any questions or anything, we'll be sending emails out and you can just get in touch with us. Thank you so much, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
Very
now.
much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you all.
Everyone.
Bye.